So I think there's a lot of different levels of technical and journalistic journalists here who have done a lot of video or haven't. So I'm going to cover a lot of stuff, and I want you guys, if you have any questions along the way, if want to know more about a certain thing, just let's do that. I want to keep it super informal, so if you guys have questions, just let me know. So I think so I'm Jordan. My name is Jordan. I'm from New York City. I've lived in Los Angeles and worked all over the place doing stuff for Discovery Channel and Animal Planet and a bunch of cable documentaries. And then over the years, I've done a lot of stuff for the New York Times and CNN, just doing a little bit of everything. So I think the difference, I may not be the best camera person or best audio person or best producer or writer or journalist, but I do all of it from start to finish. So I'm able to, and I think with budgets getting lower and you guys being expected to do way more, I think it's really good to know how to do a little bit of everything and be able to do whatever you need to in the field. So basically this is going to be essential tips. So again, if you guys have any questions. So I think the main thing is figuring out what your story is, right? So all of us have a specific topic we're looking into and figuring out, doing all of our research and figuring out everything we need to know for our particular story, whatever that might be. And I think it seems simple, but I feel like we always forget that stories are the same everywhere. So whether it's a Hollywood movie or a documentary or a short video, they're the same thing, same idea. So you have the beginning, middle, and end. I'm just going to do a quick little graph because I kind of feel like it's good to do. So basically, every story has your beginning, and then there's some sort of your main subject or whatever your subject matter is, and they're on their hero's journey or whatever it is. They come into some sort of conflict. They have issues. They have to resolve that conflict or learn something or whatever and come back up, and there's some sort of resolution. We learn something at the end. So any good story has those basics, no matter what it is. It's from the beginning of time, right? So for whatever our story is, we have to figure out what those are and how we can produce it and shoot it and get good audio for it, right? So it just depends on, well, actually, let me ask you this. Are there any specific challenges or other things that you guys have had in the field that, I mean, welcome to throw it out there, so I'm curious if there is any like specific things that you guys have run into, especially working in, in different regions.
This is Nuran Arif from Egypt. The challenge that we meet at the security and also the people that we meet, and they refuse to make interview with another one. It's not the same person, but he refused to take these photos and straight. So this is the main challenge, I think, in Egypt specific and almost in Arabic society.
Okay. So I think, it kind of goes into trying to be able to be super nimble in the field and almost pretend like you're a tourist or just someone who's sort of under the radar. So that kind of comes to, and we'll get to that in a little bit, trying to whatever your gear is, really knowing how to use it really well and keep a low profile. So, so I want to kind of get into figuring out, actually, this kind of goes into the next thing on there. So I did a documentary about construction workers in Las Vegas who got killed building large casinos. And even in Nevada, in America, they wanted nothing to do with me, and it was really sketchy. You're dealing with huge unions, you're dealing with massive corporations, you're dealing with local governments who just don't want you there at all. So basically what I had to do is figure out what was important to my story, right? So I needed to get every angle I could of this construction work. I had to figure out how I could get street permit and get as close as I could right to the fence, because they certainly weren't going to let me in. And I wanted to be protected no matter what, so I would be able to get stuff from the ground. But the other thing is, and this is depending on what your situation is, I was able to figure out with my resources, with my camera equipment, how I could get really amazing shots of these buildings. So basically I would go onto Google, do Google Maps, try to figure out which hotels I could get great shots of across the street. So I'd rent a hotel, on the 20th floor on the east side, facing out and getting really beautiful shots, looking down and figuring out what kind of lenses I would need and that kind of thing. So basically, no matter what your story is, you need a wide, and this kind of goes back to the Hollywood movie thing, right? So every sets of shots, you want you guys to kind of think of threes, right? So you have your wide shot, your medium shot, and your close-up shot. It seems, again, super simple, but when you're out in the field, you just keep these things in mind. What is your wide shot? What makes sense for your story? Your medium following the action or whatever your subject is, and then your close-up. So the close-up, for me, this goes into some documentary filmmaking, really being aware of what your story is, right? So if you're following someone even at their place of work, you're kind of looking for specific details that really tell stories. So you don't have to say it, because a lot of the stuff we can do could be shown and not said, and then leaves more room for you to actually say other things, right? So you're not showing and telling, because a lot of journalists fall into that. We say our narration or whatever it is, and then we show it. So it's kind of redundant. But if you can show it, so find like put a few examples on there, but like a ring on someone's finger, you can say that they're married, right? You can see it right there. You get a nice close-up of it. If someone's tapping their foot nervously, if you're in an interview with someone who's got something to hide, you're kind of looking for that every time you're shooting. And again, it kind of comes back to like really figuring out, being comfortable with your gear and being able to use it. So you're not only thinking about the technical side, you're thinking sort of two ways at once. What's happening and what do I need to shoot? Let's see. So the other thing, I don't know how much you guys work with video editors or if you have to edit yourself. A lot of people get into, and even now when I'm shooting, I do it the same. When I'm shooting something and there's all kinds of really interesting things happening and I'm like searching for the shot and I'm not holding any of my shots. So basically I get all this great footage, but none of it's held for more than 5 seconds because I'm always looking for something and I have to refocus. So we all fall into that trap. So I want you, when you're out there and filming, to be really, take a deep breath and hold your shot. Even if it's not the perfect shot, hold it. If it's in focus, let the action resolve itself a little bit, and then look for your next shot, focus up, and then hold that shot. So if you can hold it for 10, 20 seconds, even count in your head sometimes, your editors will love you, you'll be happier in your edit. It just makes everything much smoother. And if you have these nice, long, good-looking shots that have something to do with your story, you can, whatever narration you need to do, it just leaves you a lot of options. Let's see, what else? Yeah, I mean, it comes back to, I even tell myself every time I'm doing anything is to go back to what is my story, why is it important? Otherwise, you're going to be shooting so much footage, and you're going to come back with hours of footage that you won't need and aren't going to be interesting to your story, to your audience. So really kind of keep thinking that. It's a good through line, whether you're writing an essay, doing video, whether you're writing a story, what's your through line, and just keep that in mind. So I think this kind of gets back to the actual gear stuff, which I think is important. So I think the other problem that a lot of us have is that there's all kinds of gear. There's super professional gear. There's, whether you're using C300s or whatever your organization or whatever you have resources for. So then there's a lot of us who use DSLR cameras, which are great, and there's pros and cons to all of them. And then even now, a lot of people are using mobile or whatever your prosumer cameras where the lens is attached. So all of them have pros and cons. They're not necessarily better than the other, depending on what your needs are. But whatever you have access to, you really need to know your camera. So like, whether you want to just go in the field by yourself, not on your shoot, and really play with it, because I think sometimes the trial and error really helps. Because there's a lot of little things, settings, menus, they're all different on all the cameras, and they're so important. So if you know them really well, and something happens in the field, the light changes, the cloud goes by, they go from dark to light, all these things are super important, and you need to know how to have control of your camera, whatever it might be. So, I mean, we can go through, again, some of this may or may not be super simple to you guys, but I think even great camera people that I work with will, in the heat of the moment, they're dealing with a lot of things, they just don't get it right. So I mean, we'll go through a little bit of each. So the 3 or 4 main controls on your camera that, I mean, what is a camera? It really deals with light. So you need to know how to figure that out, right? So you have your aperture, or your iris, which basically works like the pupil of your eye. If you're in a dark situation, it opens up. If you're in a light situation, it closes down. And that affects your focus. It affects a lot of different things. So that's one of the main things. Obviously, you just really need to be able to change on the fly. ISO, which I feel like a lot of people don't really understand, because it was really more for photography back then, for when they had just photo cameras, but or if you're just a photographer, I mean, it's super important, but it is now important for video. And while if you're in a dark situation, you raise your ISO, or it's basically a gain, so you can get way more light, but then it really degrades your image. So you think, and especially when you're in those little monitors on your DSLRs, you can't really tell what's going on. So sometimes you think it looks beautiful in there, but then when you get into edit and you look at it much bigger, it's way grainy, and you're just like, oh, I can't use this. So really understanding that, trying to, when possible, try to, just the easy rule of thumb is to keep your ISO low, if you can. And your shutter speed, again, this affects your light as well. I think just a good rule of thumb, I won't go into it because I think it's going to get technical and boring, but basically double what your frame rate is, typically. There's a lot of reasons why you might want to change it, but if you're shooting 24 frames a second, basically want to 150 it. If you're shooting slow-mo, it kind of changes. There's some other issues. So this is some stuff we can go if you guys have questions, but this is where it gets a little more advanced. But like if you're in a place with a lot of fluorescent lights, or you're shooting slow motion, there tends to be that rolling, or you're shooting a computer screen, there's that rolling shutter. Again, all these things are like super distracting when you get back to your edit and you really want to use this great shot, but you can't fix that kind of stuff. I mean, there's some apps these days that you can fix it a little bit, but it'll never be perfect. So it's better to get it when you're in the field and really know how to change your shutter to fix rolling shutter so you don't get those weird light lines going through your images. So, and again, I say this, I know it's so simple, but like nothing ruins your shot more than being out of focus. Like, and it's, again, those monitors are so little. Little tricks of the trade, I mean, for me, I just use this magnifying glass. It's basically, put it on your viewfinder, basically here. And you can really, ideally you'd have a 5-inch or 7-inch or bigger monitor, but it just helps you really see, because again, if you're, depending on your situation, if you want like a beautiful interview, and let's say I'm interviewing you, and I have a close-up of you and everything is out of focus and behind and it looks great, usually that means that your iris is way open and there's letting a lot of light in, and that's why you get these, in any movie or anything, that's kind of what they go for. So you separate your subject from your background, and it looks great. However, when your iris is way open and you got this great interview, especially if you're doing it yourself, and you're asking the question, you're worried about all of your questions, if they move an inch, they move back because they're rocking in their chair or they're looking around, their eyes go out of focus. So it's one of those things where you really have to be careful, because if the eyes aren't in focus, it looks out of focus. So like sometimes I'll get a great interview and they move 1 inch and their nose is in focus, but their eyes are out, and it just looks weird. So just another rule of thumb, most lenses, most cameras, go in wherever you're standing, go all the way in, focus, and then you can come back out, and everything from your subject out will be in focus. So that's kind of the goal. Every time I move or change settings, I go in, I refocus, come back out. So I just kind of keep that in mind every time I do anything. Let's see. So yeah, that's the depth of field issue. Eye monitor, eyepiece. White balance. It's a huge pain in the ass. Again, it's one of those things where it looks good in the monitor sometimes. Sometimes you want to, you know, if it's a super sunny day, or actually if you're inside and you want to, you have sort of 3200 white balance, and everything looks, the colors are right, the white is white, but everything looks really sort of dingy a little bit sometimes. So people like to warm it up. But if you warm it up, sometimes it looks great on the monitor, you get it back into edit, it's yellow. And it's really hard to fix it. I mean, you can fix it if you have decent color, but it's another thing that you just don't want to worry about it. Because again, all the important thing that we're doing. We're not making these amazing, beautiful movies we'd like to be, but it's really about the story, right? So who's your subject? What's your interview? And mainly to figure out how to not distract your audience, because that's the main thing. You can have, I'd almost rather have all perfectly done shots that aren't beautiful than a bunch of great shots and a bunch of bad shots, because then your audience is like, even 1 second when they're trying to figure out what's happening, it's a super complicated subject, there's a lot of details, and then they're like, why is that guy's eyes out of focus? Why is it yellow? And then that you've lost them, especially with digital, Facebook, they just move on, right? So just good to get good, crisp, clean images in the field. It really helps. So I didn't want to leave this towards the end, or towards the end of the main things to look out for, but audio, especially for visual filmmakers or videographers, they kind of leave audio for last, and they're like, oh, we'll just get good, we'll get good audio, it's fine. But essentially, audio is actually the most important thing. It's actually way more important than video in most respects. Because if you can get good, clean audio, that's the one thing you can't fix. So if you get a really poor video shot, you can do something really creative about it, right? You can show headlines. You can do a cool effect on the video. You can make it smaller. You can show other B-roll. But you can't fix bad audio. So if you come back with audio that's way too high or the mic is way too far away from the person, it's just the most distracting thing. But if it's really good, it's the one thing that really brings your audience in. So if you have really good crisp audio, you can really hear the sound of, like even the foot moving against the grain of the floor. It like really brings you into the scene. So even with any TV shows I've been associated with, it's all super, super important that like you just got to get it right. So I think this is the time where I think we can talk about some audio tricks. So I don't know if there's any audio people here, but it's one of those things where if you can, use an XLR good shotgun mic. That's the best. And things that are wired as close to the person as, I'm going to use you as an example again. So basically, if I'm here, which is, you're going to get good audio. If I'm literally this over here, terrible. So it's really every foot away from the person, it's basically 3 times as bad. So if you're here because you want to get a cool wide shot and you just can't get that close, this mic, as great as it is worthless, right? So this is where I think being stealth and that kind of thing is, you don't have to have an audio person like this. Literally, one of my tricks is that I put it on, I don't know, this again, it comes to your resources, but something like this is just a portable digital audio recorder. There's different brands. You can get tiny one, this like this, but this will allow me to be roaming with my camera, and I could literally just put it right here, hide it somewhere under the table, tape it, whatever you need to do to make it sort of out of the shot and not that visible, especially if the person's just sitting and not moving. So you can put it here, get great audio, and you're in good shape. So that would be ideal if you can use these shotgun mics and get them 2, 3, 4 feet away at tops. However, that's not always possible, and especially with DSLR cameras, they don't have XLR inputs most of the time. You have to buy an adapter for it, and it ends up, your camera looks like a professional camera, and it stops you from being that stealth anymore. So the other thing, it's not super expensive, but I think it's probably the thing that's been the most worth it, is a wireless mic pack. And there's different levels of them, but basically, this way, you put this on your subject, and you can figure out a way to attach it, whether it's to your camera, or if you have a backpack, you can get a little extra wire, you can hide it, whatever you need to do to figure out your situation. Every shot, every shoot is different, right? So you have to figure out what's right for your shoot. But this way, the mic's on them, you hide it on them, and then literally you can be 20 feet, 30 feet, up to maybe 70 feet, depending on the mic, away from them, and be super stealth, so it's good. So this kind of comes to, it's not that stealth, but for me, I want to be able to do everything myself and have it in my hand And so there's all kinds of different contraptions. Again, it kind of comes to what camera you have, but there are, I'll take this apart real quick. So all your cameras have hot shoes that have, you can put a splitter on it, right? So it'll allow you to hold all these things. They all have like a little mount, and you can put whatever you need to put on it, and that way, once you have it on there, tighten it up so it doesn't jiggle. Once you have it on there, you can really be super mobile. And for me, I just like having the handle. Again, everybody has a different way they like to shoot. Some people have these shoulder rigs, some people have monopods. It just depends on what your situation is and how nimble you want to be and how stable you want to be. So for me, I just use this handle, get really comfortable with how I want it to be, and I can just be on the move anywhere I need to be. So I don't know if you guys use a lot of lav mics. This is another thing that comes back to getting good audio, whether it's wired or not. So let's see. This is your mic. There's a bunch of different clips. I mean, this is like, it seems so simple, but there's so many different clips that, depending on what your subject's clothes are. If it's a woman wearing a dress and you can't really like wire her through, and like you're just in tough situations that feel like they're a problem, you need to be able to really hide this and be able to clip it or tape it. And again, there's pros and cons to all the different clips. There's these little clips that can clip to the outside of a lapel. If you have, I don't know, moleskin tape, it's basically for first aid, is really good. And you want to make sure that it's not rustling against their clothes. That's the main thing. Because if they're walking around and you're getting the rustle on their sweater or whatever, again, your audio is basically unusable. So it's just about getting good and practicing how to do that and get solid, good audio. Any questions so far? I know I'm going through this super quick, so I don't know if this is super basic for you guys or if this is interesting. So any questions at all? No? All right, good. All right, so let's move on. So this kind of comes back to, I don't know, some of this is getting your typical interview, but a lot of us can't bring lights with us everywhere we go. They're relatively expensive to rent sometimes, or certainly to buy, and they're bulky. So it's about getting really good at using natural light and really using the sun and the light from your window or whatever you're using as your key light. So you guys assume you know mostly about three-point lighting, but basically you want, if the person's facing me, I want my key light to be here. It covers most of their face from here to here. And then depending on what kind of contrast you want, your fill light is over here. So this kind of comes to the mood you want. Do you want to set like this sort of stark noir mood? Less fill. And it's a little more contrast, and it's a little more just of an interesting of a shot. And then if you have a backlight, it helps them separate from the background. But typically we don't have that. So it's about using the light from the window. And for example, I would use this light. I'd put my interview subject here and face them maybe not directly. So if my camera's here, I'd want them maybe not directly to the light so it's all on them. Maybe I'd move them 45, 90 degrees depending so the light's just falling off their face really nice. And if you get really nice natural light, it's better than any light you can afford or buy because it's just the best light out there. So it's just great. So, and I guess some people get annoyed when it's cloudy for their shoot, but actually that's okay. I don't know how much you know about diffusion, but when you have a big light and it's super bright, you get this great bright shot, but it's like super hard light on their face. And again, it's kind of distracting and it doesn't look that great. So if you have the option, you get white diffusion, you can put over the light, and that's basically what clouds are doing to the sun. They're diffusing it, and you get this nice, even light that falls on your subject. So that can be helpful. Let's see. LED lights, if you can afford them, or can rent them, or have access to them, are great because they usually can go from cool to warm. And if you place them right, they can have the same color temperature as the sun, and it helps match it, and you have less issues with color balance and just better images. So this, I guess we can go into some of this. Some of the things that I see when people are doing interviews, because they want to set up really quickly and they just think it's okay, but the textbook way of doing it is you want your camera, the lens of your camera, to be eye level with their person's eyes. So you're looking right at them and you're not looking down on them, which kind of gives a, if you're doing it for a reason, it kind of gives a different feel to the audience, even if it's just mental or psychological, or low, it gives them another different, for better or worse, psychological thing looking up at them. So really eye level. And this is one of the things where you have to get to know your equipment, but it's one of those things where if you set up really quickly, you want to drop the legs of your tripod from the bottom first, right? So sometimes when you're way up here and you drop them from the top because it feels easier, during your interview you're reaching down here to change your shot, right? So it's just another simple thing. Bottom first, mid-level second, top first. That way, during your interview, you can change it really quickly, especially if you're by yourself and you got a big camera, or you basically look like you're sort of struggling in front of your subject while a lot of people are waiting for you. So it's a lot of these little things, getting to know your tripod, getting to know your camera, your lens, your microphone, how it works for you. And there's only one way to do it, is to get out there and try it. So when I get access to a new camera or new microphone equipment, I go out and I test it in any situation I can, because it's always the one thing I forgot to check or didn't know how to do is what happens in the field that you need to know how to do. So yeah, this is about trial and error and getting to know how to use your mics and camera. So let's see what else. I mean, this is going into some other things that just have worked for me in the past, where to sort of add a little bit of production value. There's a lot of little things you can do. Depending on when you're done with the main sort of meat of your shoot or what you're trying to get, there's a lot of beautiful, interesting shots you can get. Time lapses, for me, are the simplest, easiest way to get super cool shots. And there's all kinds of like intervalometers and other contraptions that you don't need. Literally point it at an interesting backdrop, especially when there's a lot of clouds and it's windy, for example. Just point it at the skyline and hopefully where you are, and that makes some sense to your story. And just let it run for 10 minutes. That's all you need sometimes to get a nice time lapse. You bring it into edit, you speed it up 1,000%, whatever you can, and it looks really nice, and you can use it for transitions. You can use it again for narration over your story. So it's just kind of a good, fun thing to do. This kind of goes back to what I was saying before. There's a lot of times where, especially if you're by yourself and you're shooting and you're worried about the thing that your subject, and there's a few other things going on. When I'm shooting, you're here and you're not really focused on other interesting things that are happening. And there's, especially when you're doing sort of verite shooting, or you're in the moment and you're trying to capture something that's there's a lot going on. There could be something really interesting happening outside the scope of your view of your camera. So once you have the shot and you're holding it, try to make sure I'm aware of everything that's happening and find other interesting things that are happening. And try, again, when I see it, I don't just rush and get it. Try to take a step back, figure out what your next shot's going to be, and you're just working all this stuff out through your mind as you're going through it. Let's see. So this depends on what you're shooting for. Like, who is your audience? Are you doing it for yourself? Are you doing it for a news outlet? Are you doing it for a cable network? What are you doing it for? And kind of work backwards. So like, what are their deliverables? What do they want it in 1080? Do they want it at a certain frame rate? What do they want as the final product? And if you can work backwards that way, it really helps you. Like, and even going back to your story, figuring out what the point of your story is and why all that footage would be meaningful. And try, when you're doing all your research and you're doing all your planning, all that stuff is helpful, so you're not all over the place. Again, is there any questions about, I guess, story planning, budgeting, other stuff that maybe I didn't hit for? What?
Okay, the budget for your story and the less budget, we can do it and we can make story with it. Also, do you prefer to use a hidden camera, or you prefer to use a Canon or Nikon camera like that? And you said that's the hidden microphone, but it's not worth with hidden camera, some
Right.
stuff like that. Usually we use as I said before, we working in the street, so we need the less equipment with us.
Right. So, well, the budget is, I mean, first of all, any of you guys are welcome to get in touch with me afterwards. I have a lot of like templates that are super useful, budget templates, so it has a list of everything you might need, and you just go through it about what is needed for your story, right? So you don't want to over budget, you don't want to under budget, you want to make sure you get what you need. And so that's really good, and it helps you plan actually. So you can see a list of the 100 things that might come into play and the 10 things that make sense for you, the kind of camera you might need, the different sort of permits that you might need. There's so many things to think of. So I'm happy to email you these templates. They're really easy to use, and you can kind of figure out, again, what you're, where you're giving it to. So if it's for a outlet, they might have a little better budget, and you might be able to, they want these different specs. You need to account for those. Because if you bid a project or you pitch a project and it's super under budget, you're just going to be running in circles and not be able to deliver as what you said you'd be able to deliver. So that's super important. So when it comes to being more stealth, so let me try to take this thing off. The way that I would do it, depending on the situation, is I take everything off. This is bare bones. I probably wouldn't even use a tripod. Again, when you don't use a tripod, the issue is steadiness. So the best, you got to practice it. I mean, basically with your camera, how you want to hold it, how it's comfortable to you, so you can be steady. Because if you're like this and you're trying to get stuff, like, it's just not going to be ideal. So down to the bare basics, your camera, maybe even a smaller lens in this, and then I would probably have a backpack on, and this is where it gets, you kind of have to become, I don't know if you have MacGyver here, but you got to really figure out how it would work best for you. So I would use my backpack, I'd have it on me, and I'd have all the audio equipment in my backpack, usually a wireless microphone, and the receiver would be on their back, and then that's it. You get really crisp audio, it's right hidden, usually, again, this is one of those things where it makes it easier just before you even put the mic pack on, put it down, whatever their sweater or shirt. Go ahead. Candid people on the streets, yeah, that's difficult. So I would use a Zoom recorder. I'd actually, if I could, I'd put a microphone on anyone that said yes. If they said yes and they have 5 minutes, I'd put this mic on them, no matter what.
If you don't have this option to just...
So the only other option is to get good audio. So I would use something like this, which does still feel, if it's not attached to all this stuff. So I'd probably take this off and put this right on my camera here. And if this is your only option, you could put a Zoom recorder on them. So if this is your only option, the same rules apply for this microphone. So if you're more than 4 feet away, so you go super wide and as close to them as possible. So I literally would be right here, ideally of a somewhat wide lens, and just be right here. And she's gone. It's okay. It's okay. So that's the easiest, best way to do it, to be 4 feet or less and as wide as possible. So you don't want them right in your camera, but as far away as makes sense, but as close to them as you can. But I think the other thing I would do if I had a Zoom recorder in my backpack and I wasn't using a wireless, basically I would do what I was mentioning before, is I would put this and this, and I probably wouldn't even have this tripod. For me, it's just easier because, you know, it sits there. Otherwise, it's kind of all over the place. But sometimes I'll even, I'll do this. Take this out. And tape is your friend. If you have a lot of masking tape or gaffer tape, and they were, depending on where you are on the street, it's a different issue. But if you're in a somewhat of a situation where you can literally just put it here, lean it against something, tape it, put it with this, so you know you're getting good crisp audio, then you can be far away. If I'm by myself and there's no other way, I would probably have this in my backpack with a little longer of a wire, and I'm shooting with one hand, and I just stick the mic out. I don't know if you see like news media, because of lower budgets, they come out with a camera person holding it like this and literally doing this, which is not ideal, but you know you're going to get good audio. So those are some of the things, but the main thing I try to do is hide this and put it somewhere interesting where it's 3 feet or less from them and it's stable, so it's not all over the place. But there are wireless mic options that are cheaper, that are worth getting, because then you can just throw it on your subject and they can be mobile. So anything else? But I think taking everything off your camera is best if you're in that situation. The last thing I'll say for that is that, coming back to the audio as being the most important thing, if you can't get your interview in a nice, visual that you want, and the audio, say there's trucks going by and there's a water fountain or all kinds of other noise, what I would do is I wouldn't do the visual of the interview. I'd rather just get the audio of the interview, bring them somewhere quiet, out of the way, around the block, somewhere out of where no one will notice you. Get the good audio. Then you have that audio and you can use that under anything again, like B-roll of other stuff that you then shoot your subject or whatever you're shooting separately after the fact, and you can edit them together. Because I'd much rather have the good, clean audio that can be used in any situation. So that would be my last resort, is not doing them at the same time. Because you can think of really creative ways to get visuals of your subject. And sometimes talking heads are kind of boring anyway. So you just kind of have to roll with the punches and figure out what's you're able to do in your particular situation to get your particular story. So that, every situation is very different. So that's, I guess, one. If there's any other questions about situations that you guys might be in that I haven't thought of, I'm happy to try to talk it out. This thing?
No, not this thing. The other thing. And you said to connect it to the mic so that the Zoom. Yeah. What is that thing?
I lost it.
They're all black.
Oh, here. Oh, what is it?
Yes.
So this is, especially for DSLR cameras, because they don't have XLR inputs, which are a much sturdier, better audio input, this will record your audio separately.
Oh.
So this is, you throw a card in there. Yeah, you get your audio separately, and this is pretty mobile.
Does it have to be close to the actual mic?
So you would connect your mic here, and then you could put your mic with this and not even be in the same room if you need to be. So that's one of the reasons these are great. However, if you're by yourself and now you have two things that are unattached, like that's sometimes I'll use a backpack, or I'll even put it in my pocket, or wire my own self. So I have the transmitter, the receiver, I guess, and this on my person. And so you can play with what's right for you. But this is super handy. If you have a bigger broadcast camera, usually have the XLR inputs there as well. So it just depends. So actually, that's why I was going to show you, let's see, this thing. For me, when I'm using a DSLR camera and I don't want to use that separate thing and I want to be all mobile in one unit, the problem is that your DSLR camera only has these mini inputs and only has one. So I want to have both my wireless and my shotgun at the same time. So basically this allows me to have separate audio tracks, so I could do basically two different kinds of audio and I can separate them later. So it's just a lot of these little gadgets. I mean, this probably costs $35. And it helps me for my situations for some stories. Some stories, again, they're not right, and some stories I have to be super under the radar as well, so it just depends. You know, the great thing about the hot shoe, if you just want to get your lav mic and you do have a wireless situation, you can just take all this stuff off. And this does, I guess, you know, some people might notice it, but I think a lot of people wouldn't notice this. So that's it. This goes right into your port here, and that's it. And now you have good, clean, wireless audio, and that's usually better than even having the second. Usually if I have a shotgun here, it's really just for ambient and as a backup. But usually this audio, if I'm more than 4 feet away from you, is almost unusable. So it's just a backup. So this is more important often. Any other questions or thoughts, suggestions? Okay, so the last thing, I don't know if I'm going too quickly or how fast this is going. How are we doing on time? All right, so the last thing is probably also, it's all important. So is your data. So you have these cards at the end of your shoot, and this is it. If this card breaks, if you lose it, everything you shot is gone. What I do to be super careful is, ideally even at the shoot if I can, I'll put this into my computer or on a hard drive right away. So I have it still on my card and on one hard drive. And before I erase this, I put it on a second hard drive. And I keep those hard drives separate. Whether you lose one gets taken from you, fire, I mean anything. So you know, there's lots of stories of people having all their footage on one big hard drive and the hard drive fails, and that's it. So yeah, for safekeeping for your shoot as well as for archival footage for who knows what, I would also try to have everything backed up twice. So that is super important. I mean, I think that's pretty much it. So yeah, any other, yeah.
Is there any tips for using a hidden camera?
Yeah, there are. There are certainly specific cameras made for that. It depends on your situation. Like you could even use a GoPro and put it somewhere up high and just leave the situation, and you can do that. Mobile devices. You can really trick out your mobile phone to actually be really great these days. So sometimes you can put your mobile phone and just lean it against something. And again, but hidden camera on yourself, that's a little bit different because there are very specific like spy shops, and there are camera shops that have hidden cameras, but they're very specific devices that you have to buy or rent, and you can hide them. But once you just need those devices. Once you have them, you're good to go. So the problem is the quality is usually not that great, and you can't really point it where you need to point it. So it's difficult. But I think I would research in your area any kind of like hobby shops, spy shops, that kind of thing has cool options now. But I think also your phone, if you can really just pretend you're filming something else and just use your phone, you can get really good stuff. So, and sometimes you can even hook your audio, your mic into your phone. There's little gadgets that can adapt everything. So it just depends on your situation.
Actually, my question is pretty much related to what you just said. How do you feel about, like, I guess, audio accessories for your phone in a pinch? If you need to plug in a mic or something like that?
I mean, they're good. It is similar where you still need to be close to the person. So if you have your little mic on your camera, on your phone, I know it's not always the shot that you want, but you got to be 5 feet or less. I would try to be 3 feet. And you have to kind of, sometimes really you have to make those sacrifices. Do you want the audio or do you want the image? Because if you're far away, there's really no way to fix that. You're just going to hear everything. And you're not going to be able to hear what you want to hear. But if you're just getting ambient audio of the room, it's okay. But if you really want the person's voice, even if it's a little mic on a cell phone, you got to be close. Yeah. Anything else? And again, you guys can contact me, and I have, if you have any other questions after this or in the future, or want templates for different production documents and that kind of stuff, appearance releases and all kinds of stuff that you might need. So, yeah, just let me know. Anyone else? Anything? All right, that's it. Yeah, thanks, guys.